And while they arrive, I'll also clarify that the name or focus of our group also kept on shifting. At one point or somewhere, it said sensor and sensor formats. Somewhere else, it said data acquisition. And I think there was an implicit understanding that bathymetry was one of the main focus. So we kind of went through those different perceptions of what the group was.
Mm-hmm. That's fine.
Sorry. Thanks, I misunderstood you, I guess. So, like I said, this is not as clean, but I'm sure it's equally brilliant. So the first point, there's no necessarily a hierarchy, but the first plus that we saw, actually, let me step back. I think we realized early on that when you think about the term sensor or the kind of sensors that exist in a broad sense, you're covering a pretty wide universe, all the way from this kind of sonar sensors to map bathymetry that, what's his name? The guy from Fledermaus talked about today. There you go. To in situ sensors for something like temperature that are very simple geospatially, but generate a continuous time series. So we spent some time organizing ourselves into what are the kind of categories to think about for sensors. And I'll touch on that later on the interesting parts. But in terms of pluses of GIS, we all felt, and this is a general statement that's been said over and over, that it does provide a common operational picture or a situational awareness, if you will, the ability to integrate data across systems or across sources. That it's also a great tool for planning and tasking for carrying out surveys. And I wanted to point to two examples that we've seen. One was from today from Clearwater. While they were not doing surveys or censoring, the principle we thought was exactly the same of before you go out to do what you need to do on a ship, use this tool and different data sources to plan out what it is you're going to do and optimize those activities. I'm not sure if we talked about Neptune, the Neptune case, yesterday in reporting from the physical and chemical oceanography group, but Karen Douglas, who is here somewhere, there she is, she elaborated on that in our group about how they use GIS as an integrator of information before they go out to deploy or do maintenance on their system, their seabed array. For bathymetric applications, there was agreement that GIS has been a great tool for display visualization, at least one level of QA/QC, general investigation of anomalies, and for integrating across other data sets. There was also agreement that GIS, because of the GIS imperative to integrate data and to think about data in more structured ways, that it facilitates an understanding or a design of structured data flows or workflows and data management. But that we also wanted to have the caveat that that is a generalization, that in practice for some systems that may be better fleshed out, I guess, or maybe work out better for some systems than for others. So for example, for in situ sensors that send data in real time as continuous time series, this is more of a principle than a practice and finally, I guess this relates to other points, the common operational picture. We felt that because GIS is so widespread, that in this community of handling sensors, there are a lot of specialized tools, and I'll get to that in a second. And GIS is such a widespread tool that has led to a lot of demand for integration across domains, across areas, across systems, that it serves as a positive force, I guess, to the broader community in encouraging movement to sensor integration farther and farther down into closer to the source, I guess, and sort of breaking down these barriers. So even if in practice, the tools may not be there yet to actually achieve that integration, it really serves as a very positive influence, if you will, or expectation. So the minuses. I'll start with the simple one here. Adopting a popular term, formatpalooza, in most sensor categories. And in this case, it can be a total mess because really each sensor community or each category of sensor has its own traditions. I mean, the bathymetry, the formats having to do with bathymetry have nothing to do with the formats involved in situ sensors for physical and chemical oceanography, for example. So when you subdivide the wider groups of sensors, each of those subdomains has its own formatpalooza. Some of them are better organized than others, but this is definitely a problem. And in some cases, GIS can help directly with that. In other cases, the problem is at a lower level, where GIS tools may not be the appropriate hammer that will fix this. Things like OGC or other entities may be the right approach. Also, poor integration between, let me step back, there's a recognition that there are specialized tools, generally speaking, to deal with acquisition and pre-processing of data from sensors. But in general, we felt that there is poor integration between the specialized tools and GIS. And to point to examples, contrasting examples, a positive example that we saw today was Fledermaus, where there's been a ton of progress, impressive progress in creating, not eliminating the need or the niche for Fledermaus, but rather to have a ease of transport of data or capabilities from ArcGIS to Fledermaus. And to pick a contrasting example, since we've talked about MATLAB a lot in oceanography, I'm not aware, none of us were aware of anything that tries to bring MATLAB closer to ArcGIS. So that seemed to be a case ripe for focus, I guess, given how important MATLAB is to oceanographic data, including a lot of sensor, in situ sensor data. Now, this topic here involves two sides of the same coin, that real-time data and having access to real-time data or forecasting data for planning operational activities during surveys. So on the one hand, information, the ability to integrate information about the environment. So for example, if you're going to go out in your ship, you want to make sure that you have good forecast on the weather and the ocean conditions that are expected so that you're not heading into a hurricane. So you want to have good, in addition to your normal GIS layers, good situational awareness, I guess, that are integrated into your tools. And we felt that that's not quite there yet, the integration part. And the other side of that coin is the ability to, once you're out there, the ability to display ship navigation and operational data that is integrated with that environmental or surrounding data. The consensus was that that information exists. And what people said is serial and UDP. I don't know what UDP stands for, but the serial and UDP feeds from ships could be better integrated into a common picture like a GIS environment. Then we had a specific comment that line feature data, I'll just read it, line feature data model is not rich enough for time series data. And the example that was presented was AIS data. I forget exactly what AIS stands for. It's something like, many of you sort of, that's the reason why I can never remember it, because it's not an obvious name. It doesn't tell you anything. For those of you who don't know what AIS is, basically it's the tracking system for ships, generally larger ships, that transmit via radio, I think, their position and their general attributes. So it's a pretty widespread system and extremely useful. The example that was given is that you can get the points and show the points that have rich attributes, but if you are converted to a track, you lose that connection to the individual attributes at the individual point in time. So that going back between the individual points and snapshots, locations to the line is not as seamless as it could be. Now, they made me scratch this out, but I told them that as the leader, I could read it, that another way of stating this is bring back our ArcInfo workstation topology model, where you could go back and forth between lines and its nodes. So there. No, just the topology model. So I think that's, no, there's one more that it's, and we felt that this was, we liked this example because we felt that in a way it was sort of low-hanging fruit, that this is very close, as opposed to 4D or n-dimensional data models. This is close to the heart of Esri GIS, stuff that are just what Esri does really well, and that it might not be a ton of work to, well, relatively speaking. There's a question there.
Actually, I like to turn that minus into a plus.
Sorry.
We already have the tracking system that can do that. That can receive data from UDP, TCP, like AIS. We have worked with AIS vendors like ExactEarth and IHS FairPlay, and then we can bring all the chip data displayed on the map, showing movement in real time. At the same time, we can log that to feature class. And we have geoprocessing tools that can convert point into tracks lines, preserving attribute. Whether you attach the attribute from the point into the line using the previous point or the end point, you can select that. So it's already in 10.1.
Okay, I wasn't the one who brought this up, and I don't know anything about it, so I'll just point either to Daniel or to anyone else who brought it up to see if they just didn't know about it or if there's still an issue, that a more subtle issue.
Sounds like a good sidebar for
yeah.
separate call.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think we're missing.
A white paper or a little brochure. Where are you? Oh, there you are. that talks about those features. Is this tracking analyst in 10.1, or where is that so that we can point users to that more easily?
Is that a question or an answer?
Hello. There's a website that we have on the resource. I think it's on the resources, rgs.com, and when you go to communities, and there is I think in the solutions products, tracking server is there.
Okay.
And it provides you all the information you need. It has all the API for Flex Silverlight, JavaScript, iOS, Android, that you can build application that build these moving objects in real time. And also we point you to tracking analyst, which is desktop clients on ArcMap and ArcGlobe. So you can display it in 3D as well.
Okay, great, thank you, because we'll pull that URL from the Resources Center and send it to the group, especially to this breakout group, so that people can look at that more closely. Thank you.
I have another question related to the vertex attributes on line data.
Yeah, same point.
Polylines. Would there be some alternate approach, like we're talking about an ordered set of points by time, where there was a point in time and an ordered set that is used to create the polyline. But what if the points were just stored separately and accessed separately based on time? Would that not suffice? Would it be okay to, someone wants to see a line representation of that track, we could come up with a line representation, but when they want the vertex, so-called vertex attributes, there's the point records could be accessed.
I'll have to bounce this back to whoever knew more about it, because I don't work with that enough.
That's what everyone does now. It's a very awkward workflow of having to keep dual data sets.
So we could possibly, we do have vertex IDs on polylines that right now programmatically could be used to relate to table records. Maybe we could work on exposing that functionality in a more elegant way. So what you want to do is eliminate the redundancy, be able to have line data and then maybe per record attribution for each vertex. You'd be happy with that.
Actually, you had a question first, right? Yeah.
Hello?
Okay.
All right, I'll go first.
Sure.
just to add to what he was saying, and then you can go, is I think the issue is have the vertices with the attribution, and then allow the user to pick how they want it to render. So I have a vertex feature class that has a series of attributes, and I want to render that as points, or I want to render it as lines, or whatever. You know, let the user pick. And if it was just those two things where they could render as points or lines, then it would be done. Because then you'd have all the attribution with the points in only one place.
Just a general comment. It seems like a lot of people have, certainly myself included, have difficulty finding the right tool for what you want to do. And it sounds like maybe there is a resource to do that, but it seems like developing really effective search tools people could type in, this is what I want to do, and it easily directs you to the right tool, would be a very valuable addition.
So I can speak to that a little bit. That is a long-standing challenge with our user communities across all of the application domains. And I think it's all right for me to divulge this information. And I'm on tape, too, so it's... We have actually started a working relationship with Professor Mike Goodchild at UC Santa Barbara. And he's emeritus at UC Santa Barbara, but he is actually working for us on a consulting basis and doing all kinds of interesting projects with Esri. And one of the things that he has brought to our attention is the need for a different kind of interface for searching for all of the, I think we have thousands of tools that are in our toolbox. And there is a certain degree of success that you can have using our search functions. But what about a new kind of interface that actually has the user ask a question? So I need to perform a kernel density estimation, or I need to build a suitability model. So this interface would have the user ask that question and then bring up the actual tools and the documentation to meet that need. So I think this is very far off in the future, but it's something that's being discussed now. So it's something that is on our radar. And I think there are intermediate ways that we can get to that high level of interactivity in terms of having people be able to find the proper tools. The Resource Center is a way to start with that. So we do have the resource centers, and we want to really have this community key in to our centers, of course, because we've talked about the ArcGIS for Maritime and the Oceans Resource Centers, but those are very, very new compared to the other resource centers, such as for ArcGIS in general and so forth. So resources.esri.com. If you're not intimately tied into that page, that's a good place to go.
Just a comment on top of Don's. It would be really, I think, important if any of the submitted tools packages that are being developed by the community could also be placed into those searches. I mean, for the MGET tools, for an example, I would be concerned if they're not included. People could search, and then there could be hundreds of tools that are left out of those searches if it's only the core Esri software. So it'd be interesting to see how we can work with that in the future.
Hi, I had a question. I was just curious if these folks who are interested in keeping your point attributes and lines together, if you've ever tried dynamic segmentation, or do people use that anymore? The routes
that was brought up,
events.
but again, I'll sorry, Daniel.
Dynamic segmentation's been around for a while, and it's it's kind of a customization of the existing data model, and it's really not sort of well developed at the abstract level. It's it's tuned well for routing buses and dump trucks and things like that, and the workflows and business processes that they need. But in a more general sense, it's maybe not the most efficient or flexible. I think what the question was getting at was that kind of functionality, but let's get it up outside of that routing the milk truck around level of function.
I wonder if this is something also that we can put in the category of potential considerations for the Arc Marine upgraded data model. I forget his name, but he mentioned that the tracking extension does this, but that is an extension as opposed to a more core functionality that could be reused across the system. The last minus point that we had was also pretty specific, that people felt there was a bias towards terrestrial data when using the Mosaic data sets. I've never used that, so I can't explain it very well, but I'm told that there is some sort of drop-down list or pick list that has very specific raster data sets that are not abstract. They refer specifically to satellite sensors, for example, and that was totally unnecessary and limiting for bathymetry applications and other submarine raster applications. So interesting observations that we had. Generally, because of this format palooza and meta format palooza, oh, there is a question there.
Thanks. Hi. So your last minus, as of 10.1, we've released a bathymetry extension, which kind of focuses more on managing bathymetric data with Mosaic data sets. So we've kind of identified that lack, and then kind of extended it a little bit further. So that's the ArcGIS for Maritime bathymetry extension.
He was the one who brought up the Paul Johnson from the...
And to add something to what Lise just mentioned, that's an extension, the ArcGIS for Maritime bathymetry, but within core, now you can load BAG, bathymetric attributed grids, which is as close as it gets to a standard for bathymetry information, graded information bathymetry, and you can just drag and drop and load it into ArcGIS. So there is some support for bathymetric data built in the core software now. And that can be fed in to Mosaic data sets as well.
Part of what we were looking at, though, is we have Esri grids that have bathymetry in them, and the bathymetric solution does not currently support anything except for the BAG data. So you go that way, it works great if you have the BAG data, but if you have existing grids, we've actually had users that come in and they look at that drop-down list, you see all these satellite formats. This doesn't work with my kind of data. There is a unknown field or something along that line, but it's kind of immediately off-putting to look at that list and say, this doesn't work for my application.
That's absolutely true. And to give you some background on that, the reason why we focused on bags initially is because of all the metadata that is embedded in the bag. But we do realize that it's not enough. We want more. So we want to be able to load other gridded formats, any types of format supported by ArcGIS. Instead of having elevation, you could have depth information. So we want to be able to feed that into the system, and we're actually working on that right now. But the challenge here is that you need to, in addition to the grade of depth pixels, you need to also ingest metadata associated with it, which is not embedded into the file. And that's why it's taking us a bit more time. And we started with the low-hanging fruit, the bags, because it brings the most bang for the buck for in terms of software development. But yes, we have that in mind, absolutely, ingesting other formats for bathymetry.
I was wondering, if your generic Mosaic tool, though, if you could even edit that list as an XML file and say, this is a bathymetry grid.
Yes, you can. You can actually load. If you have a Mosaic data set, but this is becoming a bit more technical. But when you have a Mosaic data set, you can actually ingest any gridded data set.
So maybe that's another side conversation, like the one about bytes. Or
An immediate fix is to convert from bags to Esri grids in Fledermaus, correct? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, raster to bags. Yeah, so that you can then put your bags into the ArcGIS for Maritime. And
I should add that before I moved into the interesting, we did have certain issues. We touched on certain issues and the minuses that in the end we ended up cutting because they were so generic. The issue of 3D and 4D support, especially time, in this case, it keeps coming back over and over and over. And for in situ sensors that measure continuous time series, that's a complete no-brainer, that not having a generic sense of a generic ability to handle time series is essentially totally prevents you from managing time series data. So it's a pretty basic limitation. So for interesting, because of this format Metapalooza, where each sensor subdomain has its own variety of formats, there was a general agreement that it would be good to have wrappers for direct reads to common formats. And the emphasis here is about the ability to handle multiple formats, but also not to, much like what's being done with NetCDF, I guess, which is the right approach, read directly into those formats that the community has invested a lot of effort into, wrap around different formats, but also read directly from the formats as opposed to requiring the conversion to an Esri-specific format. And this is related to that having wrappers and direct readers to common formats would facilitate the automated handling and pre-processing of sensor data. An interesting observation is that complex sensor networks or heterogeneous sensor networks are emerging these days. An example of this include IUS, OOI, which is an NSF initiative that includes both bottom ocean observations and water column ones. Neptune, similar to OOI, but this is going to pose, and is posing already, an interesting and probably very useful challenge to us, a larger community, being able to address that heterogeneity of networks. As opposed to, someone came up with a great example, I think, of the Argo network of floats that are deployed, I think thousands of them across the globe, and are a terrific, terrific resource. And there are good data, automated data processing that has been built around them, but I think they have one key advantage over things, more heterogeneous things like OI and IUS, which is they're measuring one or two or three things, and in the same way. When you have that, you can simplify your workflow and apply the same thing all across a global network. When you have something much more heterogeneous, you don't have that advantage or that simplicity. So this is the world we are coming into, of complex heterogeneous sensor networks. We also wanted to make a distinction that sometimes may get lost, I guess, when dealing with the time dimension. That on the one hand, the lack of a true 4D data model prevents general handling of the time dimension. But that's a slightly overlapping, but a slightly separate issue of the ability to access real-time data in real time. So we got time, the issue of time, or the inadequacies of handling time, involve two components. One is a general dimension, another one is access now. For accessing things now, there may be solutions that can be implemented or that may be in place, like a WMS that someone implements that shows appropriate symbology and is refreshed all the time. So anyways, just to separate those concerns. Yeah, that's it.
Emilio, one thing I forgot when we were talking about CF that came up in our group was that CF has also, based on their success with gridded data, as you know, they have expanded into trying to handle sensor data in terms of profiles and time series and collections of profiles, collections of time series, swath data, radial data. There's there's a countable number, less than 10, of data models there that could be, used not only for gridded data, but for this other kind of data, potentially. And it's been and it's been coordinated with CSML, I think, and so there's some sort of feeling that, the community might go that way, I guess, in some sense.
I'm just going to, it's my duty in working with IUS to say also, for those of you who are not aware, that we're slowly moving, I guess, towards more agreement, but there's still quite a bit of disagreement about the appropriate approach in the community, and definitely the CF, the whole package of CF, of interacting CF, OpenDAP, CDM, etc., standards is one solution that is emerging as a more and more compelling one. Another solution with overlap and with different strengths and weaknesses, is the SWE, the Sensor Web Enablement, that is led by OGC. It has competing standards and a different set, I think, of strengths and weaknesses. And certainly in the area of sensor data portrayal, it has equivalence to the NetCDF, or rather the CDM, the Common Data Model models, I guess. In IU specifically, we're trying really hard to merge the two to a large extent and to define sensor web enablement responses, data encodings and responses that actually are based on the CDM and that reflect directly the CDM data models so that we can move across those two worlds and more easily. Stay tuned.